I am really, really looking forward to having a conversation today with Jim Graebner, who I recently had the pleasure of meeting for the first time because of his wife and my dear friend Ayn Fox in Denver, Colorado recently. And because of social distancing, we favored just having a distance tour of their home, which I've got some wonderful, wonderful footage of, and I'll mix it in with this interview. And I know you'll look forward to meeting this extraordinary man, and he's had a very interesting life. Jim, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your time.
You.
So,
Thank you for the opportunity.
Jim, the things that I know about you are not necessarily the things that you would say of yourself. So let me give the people who are listening here a little bit of a head start, and then please fill in for us. The thing that stands out for me most is that you are probably one of the few people who has visited every single county, not state, but county in the United States. And you and a friend did that quite purposefully, I understand. And when I visited you and Anne recently, you gave me a copy of this book because of my zigzag for zero going from Southern California to Capitol Hill. And I did get started. William Least Heatmoon is an incredible prose and author, and I'm really enjoying Blue Highways, which is really telling about his experience traveling through the United States. And already, I'm only a few pages in, and already I can tell that there's just something about seeing the world through its other than usual pathways, highways in this case. You also happen to be an incredible designer. You and Anne gave me a tour through your home recently, and I got to go through the Tunnel of Love. And I think you had another name for it. What was the other name? The name?
The transportation romance wall.
The Transportation Romance Wall. And it was really sweet. And I'll show some pictures of it here while people are having an opportunity to listen to your words. What else would you say about yourself? What would you like people to know about what you pay attention to?
Well, it was the first time that either of us have lived right in the middle of a downtown area, and it's turned out to be quite a change in our lives for the better. You wonder sometimes if you lived as we have in suburbia for many years, what it would be like to live downtown in the middle of downtown, 10 blocks from the state capitol. And it's a whole life change. That's one thing. One of the stories I remember was we moved down there and we have one parking space in our garage underneath. And remember walking up to some folks that had moved in after we did, and their biggest problem was what are they going to do with the other two cars they had? Well, 6 months later, we ran into them at another party, and I asked them, "Did you ever find parking spaces?" And they said, "Well, no, we don't need them anymore. We got rid of those two cars." And we've already pretty much decided that once our 20-year-old Honda gives up the ghost, we're not going to bother with another car. So that's one life change that a lot of folks just don't quite get. We walk everywhere. That's pretty nice too. My office is, as you know, across the street from the loft, which is nice. And we've gotten very European in our grocery habits. Before the pandemic, anyway, one of us went out once a day and we buy the fresh groceries and vegetables, fruit, and everything else we needed for that day's food, and that would be it. So we got in a lot of good walking too. Those are just some of the things. The house, the loft itself, I think as a younger man, I was very intrigued by the famous old movie which featured a loft in Pittsburgh called Flashdance. and it's a wonderful movie. If you ever seen it, it's a nice romantic thing. But I was really impressed by the way they lived in a loft, and that's what we did. Our building's 130 years old. Well, no, almost 140.
And
So
you've been an instrumental part of both keeping the integrity of the origins of the building while also updating it, I understand. Is that right? Are you officially an architect by study but not trade, or you just have an eye for these things?
just as I'm not a historian by degree, I'm not an architect by degree either. In fact, I'm one of these guys. It took me the full registration junior year in college, undergraduate. I finally had to declare a major. And I had to sit there for about 20 minutes and figure out what am I going to do for a major. I just like so many things. So very, like Anne, very eclectic.
And everyone will have an opportunity to meet Ayn Fox as well, your beloved spouse. I would like to speak a little bit about the lens that you hold as not a studied or educated as a historian, but certainly practiced as one. Specifically, we walked down on the other hallway, the other side of the wall, looks a lot like my late husband's wall in terms of just thousands of books. And I asked you if you had read these books, and you said every single one of them, which does not surprise me at all because when I speak with you, you have so much to say about knowledge, especially around transportation. By the way, I am not certain I'll ever own a car again either. I love driving, and this zigzag for zero from Southern California to Capitol Hill is just being thoroughly enjoyable. I love every second of it. And even though it is a hybrid, it's still quite a lot of gasoline and fumes into the air. And a very strong consideration of where I land next will be, can I go without a vehicle and just operate more on foot? I look forward to finding the place where I can do that. So people are welcome to send me suggestions. By the way, I'm looking. Jim, let's talk a little bit about your going from county to county. What, first of all, just briefly, what inspired you? But more importantly, and what I think people would love to hear about is what what was your experience like? What would you say to people who may be thinking about that either as something they would want to do or maybe thinking that sounds like just a really far out idea. What could you possibly gain from doing something like that?
Well, the answer to that kind of query came when I was about midway through it, and I'll get to that. The the inspiration was my then roommate and I decided that we'd really be fun to see who of the first of us would be the first one to be in all 50 states. So we were tied to 49-49, and then my roommate Bruce went off and got married. All I got from him was a postcard from Hawaii that said 50 all over it. And we decided it had been so much fun and we'd learned so much and we really had some enjoyable times. And I think I knew in my soul why I wanted to do it. But we decided that going for all 3,200 odd counties in the U.S. would be next. Well, he dropped out after a while. I kept going until I completed it. And I think the learning as you go along, and if you stay on the blue highways, the title of your book, which is what intrigued me, and blue highways stand for the roads that are not interstates. As you know, they're the ones that go to the unusual places, to little towns, to smaller areas where there's one in the book, several in the book, where I'd actually been to the town, and one where I'd stayed overnight, one where we had stayed overnight. And I still remember that, sitting on the porch of this place in Tennessee, and just talking with the owner, the then owner of the place. We stayed there till probably midnight, just talking and learning, that kind of experience. And you get to know, going to the part that why it was done. I realized that about halfway through it was done because this is such a big, wonderful, diverse country, and that in itself is a wonder. And I'd never been to Europe. Hadn't been to Europe till 1980 or so. But I wanted to see this country first, and I wanted to get to know it from that level. And having been there, not watching movies or getting someone else's impression, and that became the thing. It was there were rules I had and all that, and I dug up actually an old map that I did about halfway through, and then realized I didn't need to do that anymore. But there are places in this country that are surprisingly wonderful. There are little gems that you just never realized were there. There, admittedly, are some places I don't care if I never see again, but but that's part of getting to know it. So after I've gotten to know this country and a good deal of Canada, gives you a whole different perspective on life.
I took some of those blue roads from my origin of Temecula. I took the mountain pass through um, not Palm Springs, Palm Desert on the way to
Some
Phoenix.
desert, yeah.
hmm And then from Phoenix to Albuquerque was mostly highway. But then from Albuquerque
Yeah.
to Denver, where you are, or Littleton, which is where I was staying, I took blue roads again. And I'm not sure that people really realize how much a highway takes out the natural landscape. Even the highways that are not yet populated tend to have an emptiness that these blue highways do not. So, I'm able to see the rock closer up. I'm able to stop more often with actual stop signs rather than stop lights and not as many cars. So, just that simple pause and the connection to the visual connection, but also I will roll down the windows sometimes and let that fresh air come into the car. Those are things that I don't experience when I'm on a big highway, and it does make a difference. I notice when I'm on a big highway, I'm listening to music for the most part. I'm noticing cars more than I'm noticing landscape. But when I'm on those blue highways, I'm listening to the noises of, of the of the landscape itself. I'm closer in. I don't want to hear music. I want to hear the sounds of those back roads. Now, let's turn our attention just a little bit. You were in the transportation business and you studied trolleys specifically is one of your passions, and I think it's associated with your profession as well. You've written about that in a couple of books, and I'd love for you to send me those links so that I can include them in the description of this interview. Tell us a little bit about how transportation has changed over time from when you first began to study it and what you see today.
Jump ahead first to something which a friend of mine and I are working on now, and then go backwards from that to get to the transportation. It seems right now, and this has been really exciting. A friend and I are working on something which is fairly far out, but the idea is to take the pandemic that's going on, the issue of equity, which is huge, and then the issue of climate change, and lay these over each other. And then if you know the mathematical concept of the Venn diagram, which I'm sure you do, which is where those overlap. And if you poke right through it and get everything solved, then maybe you've got something. So what we're looking at is there a place where those overlap? There's certainly plenty of them, where you can generate through that a series of actions by going right through that Venn diagram, which might help to solve or move us forward on all three of those issues, those huge issues, at the same time and in concert. And are there things from one of those issues which can help make the other happen? So now that goes a long way back, but it's part of the same thing, because transportation in this country, for example, I'm just going to take just the pollution aspect. Transportation didn't start with cars, it started with horses, and that was one form of pollution. And it went to the railroads and steam locomotives, and that was another huge form of pollution with all the smoke. Then we had cars, and you know that story. So as we move ahead and get in now to urban development, and we take the density that the city in history has always been a magnet for learning, for museums, for art, for a lot of things. So let's keep those good things, which come primarily from the agglomeration of people that live together in close connection in the city. Now let's bring in the equity part of it and make sure that all of those people are treated fairly and equally and have the same opportunity. So now you can move ahead with the effort to both make the more dense development, population concentration, um, eliminate some of the problems you have that the automobile has brought with it. The need for huge amounts of land which don't do any good, they just fill up with more cars, and get to a walking, a more sustainable type of transportation, and do all of that, and then help to solve the climatic problems and the equity problems. So that's what I've been trying to work with. There's some fairly heavy thoughts.
Well, this is the perfect place for it. People who listen to other interviews and my vlog know that our thinking is that's the way I think too, is just sort of where can we find those sweet spots that if you address the underlying thing that is impacting and influencing the results and outcomes that you see in these multiple areas, then all of the things improve. And I would just add a fourth one to the three that you're looking at. I think you said transportation, COVID, and environment. And I would say our medical
Equity.
system, equity, thank you, equity specifically. Thank you for the correction.
Which would include medical.
It does. It certainly does. And I think most people who look at medicine today, and it's pretty evident with COVID, especially, that it impacts areas where we have less equity, and that has been compounded by the ways in which, for example, waste gets funneled into certain communities more so than others. I mean, it just sort of gets stacked upon stacked upon stacked, and eventually the oppression of those systems and the ignorance of the quality of life of some over of the quality of life of some over others is the way I would put it, is really problematic. And we are seeing today the outcomes of that systemic decision to ignore the needs, the very basic rights as a human being, and how that plays out in terms of death rates and morbidity, and just on and on it goes. Jim, I'm going to propose something here. I'm going to take that and then move it slightly. One of the things that happen between horses, carts, and vehicles that we see today, and you see this evidenced in, let's just take Amazon, for example, the delivery of goods at the speed of transportation. I personally wonder if one of those pinholes that you'll find that intersect with all of those is, I wonder if it could be followed along a trend line of when we began to speed up and when we stopped pausing, when we stopped stopping, when we began to just keep going, 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 going. And I think I've heard from many people, and I feel this way about this virus that we're working with right now. One of the advantages of it is that it has created the need to step back a little bit and pause and
Hmm.
re-examine how we orient to pace, not even speed so much, but pace. Does that resonate with you? And if so, what are your thoughts about that as a person who, and as a historian who's looked at transportation specifically?
Absolutely, I agree. One of the really big things we are doing is guilty of running around and run in circles, wave and shout, and take time to smell the roses is the antidote to that, and we really be doing with it. It's a little bit of um, I'm reminded of another old couplet about working in the or living in the suburbs and working downtown. One of the things you learn in urban transportation after a while is that there is a limit or a preference rather to the amount of time that people present. People are willing to. Your mic's muted.
Go right ahead.
Uh, one of the one of the things that I do, even for an old guy, I do know a little bit about Zoom. I've had to learn that. Um, but and this is a good example. Taking the time now to spend time talking to you helps me. Hopefully, will do something for your desires. But what it does is we're talking about things which we need to think about. We're not just reacting to a job which has to be done here, or something I have to do here, or take here, or run here. Um, but the pace at which we work, we have to take time to smell the roses. I know those are old bromides, but there's a part of it for my chosen career path was to realize, and there's plenty of studies that show this, that the average distance where a person is comfortable commuting is about 20 minutes. And that's true whether it's walking or driving or helicoptering or whatever. So what we've done in sprawling out from Los Angeles, for instance, or San Diego or San Jose, is we've violated that. When I was in San Jose working as a director of transportation for the county, I had people that drove our buses that were living all the way over in the Central Valley and taking 2 hours to commute. Now, they made the best of it. There was always five of them in each carpool, and they used a van, and four of them would play bridge in the back while they drove in, which kind of interesting. But that then you go a little step farther to the medical side, and that has profound impacts on people, not just from breathing the fumes, but just from the pace of life. And you don't have time to do a lot of things that you'd otherwise love to do. These things are important, and I think that's what we're starting to realize. And to me, having more time to do more things, first of all, you won't get bored because it just fills up. I suspect that even during the virus, you're finding where did I ever have the time to do all the things I've done before? I started my own business 30 years ago, and since it's gone down to right now, I'm doing very little on that. But I'm still finding where do I find the time to do all these other things I'd like to do? I think that's the world is so full of wonderful things and places to go and people to see and relationships to pause, create, and renew, that we really need to spend more time on that. And if we can solve these other problems, as you point out, if we can find that thing that goes right through all of those, puts them all up on the way, we're going to have more of that time. So I don't think we'll be bored if we solve these other issues.
No, I don't think so either. There's always something that we can pay attention to. I do worry about people who are lonely right now in COVID, and we're starting to really see the impacts, and even even individuals who have a lot of family members who are able and are doing their best to stay in social, not socially distancing, but just physically distancing. There's still that sense of needing to exchange the card in bridge, or just that exchange that happens. I certainly hope that we will, that that boredom, the possibility of boredom, will be minimized by our ability and I think quite natural desire to tend to the bigger questions of life. And it's that attention to the bigger questions of life. My husband would call it the perennial questions. And in that, those perennial questions they're not just for philosophers. They're really for the people everyday living. I'm getting ready to facilitate a webinar on end of life care, and that is really just a dedication to taking some time for physicians and clinicians and patients and family members to just kind of take a pause back for a moment and examine not what is an advanced correct care directive versus a DNR, and we'll cover those things, but more importantly, what is it that we might not be talking about that if we did would help us have better quality of life while we're here, which might then influence the quality of our death as well. I'm going to leave us at that and just ask for any closing thoughts before we end this interview. What else would you like to say or hear others?
But
Let others.
just what you just said now shows how fast an hour can go.
Isn't
It's
it?
really, really fascinating how we could continue this conversation for a long time. And I think what you have to learn from life is take time to smell the rose, as I mentioned. Also, remember that old thing from medieval maps, here be dragons. Well, it's on the border of things. That's over there. You don't worry about it. Those are the dragons. Take time to go over and make friends with some of those dragons. Take time to look at them, explore how they live and all that. One of the things about traveling, it really teaches you a lot. So enjoy the best thing I think was an old beer ad, which goes way, way back. Live life, every golden moment of it. That's it.
I'm going to guess the brand. Live life, every golden moment of it. Is that Coors, do you think? Or do you remember the
Budweiser.
Budweiser, every golden moment of it. All right. And follow the blue highways.
Stay off the interstate, follow the blue highways.
Yeah, for sure. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time for this interview. I really am glad that we had a chance to talk, and also
Thank you,
a chance
Vivi.
to visit with my mask on and see that spontaneous protest that came through Denver, downtown Denver, right outside of the Grand Central Station there, which was really heartening. We got on our knees for that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think it was, in honor and just in solidarity with the individuals who were calling for this big change that we know is needed. We've been working for many years, and now I think maybe has I don't know for you, but it's sparked more hope in my mind, even though it's really tough right now. It's like we're meeting dragons as a culture. We are going to meet
Yes.
dragons right now, and that was that was what my husband spent his life doing, is meeting dragons, the ones in here, the ones in our relationships, and the ones that systemically oppress our capacity to really put love first and honor ourselves and each other in healthy ways.
Yep. Very good. And best of luck in those chores too.
Thank you. Take really good care. And if you'll pause for just a moment, I'll say goodbye for those who are watching. And if you want to learn more about Jim Graebner, I'll put a few links in the post here. Thanks for listening.
Floyd. You really feel that 8 minutes. Holy moly.
You do.
Wow.
I'm really glad I had an opportunity to be here for this.
You never know what you can experience down here.
They were escorted in and escorted out by these peaceful vehicles, clearly coordinating it to make sure that it's
Peaceful, yeah.
yeah.